In DC, for DC. DC Radio, 96.3 HD4 and DCRadio.gov.
Hello, friends, and welcome to Cannabis Conversations, where each week I bring you all the news and all that's happening in the world of cannabis with a huge variety of intriguing guests ranging from local small business owners to national and international industry magnates in this growing industry. We delve into the hows, the whys, and the how-tos of cannabis. I hope this platform is educational and enlightening to you, satisfying your curiosity and expanding your knowledge of cannabis. Cannabis Conversations is made possible by Mayor Muriel Bowser, the Director of Office of Cable Television, Film, Music, and Entertainment, Angie Gates, and the Director of Radio, Max Myrick, and his awesome staff, especially Shane Lewis. You can listen to the show Monday through Friday on 96.3 HD4, DCRadio.gov, and SoundCloud at 2:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. I'm your host, Linda Mercado Greene, and this is Cannabis Conversations. Today, I was just so excited to have this beautiful lady sitting across from me. We just met within the past several months.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think, where did we meet? Was it in Vegas?
Actually, it was Colorado at the CTF Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Task Force kickoff.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. And little did I know, but I have since found out she is a mover and shaker, not only in the cannabis world nationally, but also in the political world nationally. This girl has done everything, and I was just on her about her bio that she sent me was all of one small paragraph, and then I started delving into her history, and I'm like, you got to do something about this. You got to increase. Please welcome my guest, Ngiste Abebe.
Hi, Linda. Thanks for having me.
I'm so happy to have you.
Yeah.
I am really, really happy to have you. So we are both now in cannabis. Both of us transferred our professions into cannabis. So Ngiste is the Director of Public Policy at Columbia Care. And Columbia Care actually was born here in D.C., right?
Yes, our first dispensary was 8 or 9 years ago.
That's right.
I think we were the first one, the first medical one to open.
That's right. And now it's one of the nation's leading medical cannabis companies. And I have a very special bond with Columbia Care. Yuri Lee, who's a general manager of Capital Care. So Columbia Care, Capital
awesome
Care
Appellate,
is the vice chair of the DC Medical Cannabis Trade Association, for which I chair. And guess who is the secretary, whose arm we twisted a little bit.
Happy to serve, especially with such illustrious leaders at our home.
And Ngiste, I was thinking, we are a trade association representing all the legal licensees in the District of Columbia, which is the capital city of the world and the 51st state. But the four of us, so there are 4 women leading and running this organization.
4 women of color.
4 women of color. So we have you, who is Ethiopian American. Then we have Couture Gulban, who is the treasurer from Anacostia Organics, who is Jamaican and Korean. Then we have Yuri Lee is the vice chair, who is Korean. And then we have Linda Greene. Somebody says Linda Greene. Linda Greene, who is Native American and Filipino.
Wow.
So,
what a crew.
I don't think that we could probably go to any other trade association in the United States, particularly of cannabis, and find that type of diversity. But our association is, I think, the most diverse cannabis association in the country.
Yeah, I think it's really impressive, and it certainly makes our association meetings really gratifying to be a part of, to see the diversity that comes to the table.
Yeah.
Both in identities
even with our
and
licenses
experiences.
now, we are probably ahead of most states with our diversity.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is also saying something, given that it's a medical-only market.
Right.
And full legalization remains stuck in the federal struggle, shall we say, for now.
Oh, God. And how well you know that. And so you've worked on the Hill, or you've worked in public policy. What did you do in all of that?
So I came most recently from Virginia Democratic politics, was already getting involved in cannabis through the Board of Virginia NORML, because I've got some family that lives in California, and it was really jarring to, on the one hand, be able to go to a dispensary with my mom, which is also quite the experience.
I want to hear about that at some point.
But to be able to go to a dispensary in California with impunity, and then come back to Virginia and be like, oh my gosh, like, people are still being locked up every day.
Right.
And the same thing here I could risk my entire future if I had just a small amount in my car. Though that has changed. Decriminalization just passed.
Yesterday, did it?
Yeah,
was that
over
yesterday?
the weekend.
Over the weekend, or sometime soon?
They had a long session, because when you have your first Democratic trifecta in a few decades, there's a lot of policy to get through. But they decriminalized cannabis, and so possession of flower, hash, concentrates of up to 1 ounce is now just a civil penalty. So, there's a lot more to go.
Yeah.
But the Democratic leadership has signaled that in Virginia, at least, they're working really hard to get to legalization in 2021. Quickly.
I'm surprised. I think you were at the MJBiz conference when I spoke on that panel, and we were talking about the 2020 state elections and the effect of cannabis and legalization. I just never thought that Virginia would get there that soon. That's my home state.
Literally getting goosebumps just thinking about the years of work that went into getting to just decrim, and to know that already, there's a massive bill going to study in Virginia to look at the path to legalization. And when you look at the language in the legislation for the scope of the study, it is far-ranging. It's talking about tax structure and regulatory regimes, how to protect and expand the medical market, and also how to connect those two things to equity and repairing the harms and learning from past states. And I think it's really exciting to see the study of that breadth being done by a legislature, especially since we have Illinois that has kind of paved the way for how to do this through law and not through ballot initiatives.
Right.
And also, we just know that people are ready for this. Medical cannabis polls at plus over 90%, probably more popular than, apple pie in this country right now.
That's true. That is true.
Yeah, and adult use is at 2/3, both in Virginia and also across the country. It's pretty standard to be about 2/3 support for removing all penalties and having a regulated adult use market. So I'm excited to see that Virginia legislators are kind of leaning into that conversation and taking it seriously from their constituents. So
isn't it exciting to be part of history now? Because we're still in the pioneering stages here.
Yeah.
And to be part of history, seeing the climate change and the mindset change. And
on climate change, all of this was passed with bipartisan support. All of the changes on the medical front had nearly unanimous support in both the House and Senate in Virginia, and decrim passed with support from 9 Republicans, I think, came over in the House, and a few more in the Senate to support decriminalization. This is not a partisan issue anymore, and it's really exciting to see. Virginia, which is to see one of the first states in the South to start really grappling with what's the future of this industry.
Like I said, I'm still pinching myself behind that.
Yeah.
I'm really, 2 years ago, last year, I was just telling everybody, forget my state, that's going to be the last one. It's going to,
I know.
And to see where we are now, it's like, geez.
The conversation has shifted. But, it's been a lot of years of work from a lot of different folks to get us there. And so I'm incredibly thankful for the people who fought for this long before I came onto the scene.
Well, so let's go back to the beginning of your career.
All right.
Start. It's just too much for me to even try to comprehend. Start to where you are now.
Yeah, it's funny because if you had told me at the beginning of 2019 that I was going to end the year working in cannabis, I probably would have laughed at you. But now that I'm here, it really is the culmination of like all of the different phases of my career, because about 10 years ago for a grad school project, I took this policy workshop class, which felt like the right idea because you got to do policy, but for a real world client. So it was less about being in the books and more about like actually getting policy done in the world. And it turned out our client was the Office of National Drug Control Policy. And we did an analysis of Proposition 19 and why it had failed in California, which was one of the first ballot initiatives trying to legalize adult use. And our whole analysis, like we came to them not with conclusions, but with a set of new open-ended questions, because we were like, everything about the data says this didn't fail because people don't support legalization. It failed because people didn't like this specific bill. And most specifically, people were concerned about kids' access and driver safety, which we know are
it's still a concern, major concern right now.
Major concern, and there are lots of good policy solutions to ensure that kids get the right information, evidence-based drug education early on, and we've seen youth rates decrease in states like Colorado because of those efforts. And we know that there are efforts that can be done for transportation safety as well. But we came to them with a list of questions around like what's going to happen. What is the federal government going to do if a state legalizes this first?
I'm loving this.
Yeah, right. I had no idea. I did not participate in the plant. I was then went into international affairs and had a security clearance. So I was definitely not going to risk my whole livelihood for
some cannabis.
Right,
for cannabis, yeah.
At the time.
It's amazing how many people find themselves into that dilemma.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, even members of Congress, they can't get a card.
No. And I think that's going to be one of the big pushes and one of the reasons why we start seeing more momentum towards federal legalization is the number of people, especially when you talk about veterans who need access to cannabis to help manage PTSD and chronic pain and other effects from their service, who, so many veterans serve as federal contractors, certainly in the D.C. area.
Yes, indeed.
And they cannot access a medical card without risking their entire livelihood.
Right.
And that's, I hope that we start seeing our congressional representatives take that story seriously because it's a real struggle.
I do too.
And some of the stories you hear from veterans who have been able to access medical cannabis, I mean, it has turned lives around. Yeah. So I, had done that one presentation about a decade ago, went off, did countering violent extremism work and other international affairs work with USAID.
Did you travel a lot with USAID?
Some, not as much, because I was civil service, so based out here. But I did get to go to Mali for a week and Bosnia for a few months, which was
fantastic.
Yeah, really amazing.
For a few months.
Yeah, man, that residence in Sarajevo, they loved me.
Oh my gosh. I have to hear all about that another day.
Yes,
I want to hear all about it.
But so, spent all that time, and it's interesting because I left that, started getting involved in, went from democracy overseas to democracy at home and started getting involved in local politics and loved it because it was a lot of the things that I enjoyed. But I was ready to be out of a bureaucracy. And it's just interesting because I think one of the things that I think about when people think about how to get into the cannabis industry is think about what you already do, because somebody somewhere in cannabis needs you to do that, whether it's marketing, government affairs, policy, accounting, lawyers, like we need it all. We're a business just like everything else, and it's not all about the plant itself.
Even office suppliers.
Oh my gosh, office suppliers, HVAC contractors.
Yeah. We just break it down. We need it all.
Yeah.
It's a normal business.
Yeah. And so, I don't have a super cannabis-centric background. I just had a lot of policy organizing and communications experience and a real passion about the justice issues in this space.
You want to expand on that?
Yes,
because that is a hot topic, and we're all, looking at that very closely and trying to change it.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of focus, and there should be, in how to have diversity both within the industry and within the ownership of the industry, which is two different types of diversity. But I also think that sometimes we can get super focused on the industry itself and forget that, a lot of people were impacted by the war on drugs, and all they wanted to be able to do was smoke a joint. They didn't want to have to grow it in order to get their restitution. And I think making sure we have more programs like Illinois' Community Reinvestment Fund that tries to reinvest in communities as a whole, not just people who have been most directly incarcerated, but the people who have been affected by over-policing, folks who have been incarcerated and now don't have access to certain resources like small business loans or other, sometimes student loans can be affected, and other programs like that you lose access to, and making sure that folks have access. And quite frankly, I think there needs to be a bit of effort into educating and making sure that we do serious outreach so people know these resources exist now.
So correct.
So, because it's hard. I mean, it's really exciting. And if you follow this industry, you're like, oh my gosh, this is so great. This new fund exists. But how many of the Illinois residents who need to access that fund know that it exists right now? So, I've been following Illinois, and I think all of us are, because right now I think that they have the best program. How would do you do any work in Massachusetts with Columbia Care? Yeah, we have a few dispensaries there.
Yeah. So how do you compare Illinois and Massachusetts?
That's a great question. And I think one of the key things, and this is definitely getting into the wonky side, is it makes a big difference when you pass the bill with a willing legislature versus having a ballot initiative that a reluctant legislature has to execute. Because in Illinois, equity was at the forefront of every piece of it.
Yes.
And the whole program and the transition to adult use was really focused on social equity applicants and how to, it centered that part of the problem in key ways. And in Massachusetts, I think it took a longer time to even, Massachusetts and California legalized adult use in the same year. And Massachusetts only in the last year actually had adult use sales start. So I think that's one sign of just how long it took this legislature to kind of come to terms. The other issue and real challenge, and there's been some recent news coverage on this for Boston, is finding the right balance between state and local control. Because in Massachusetts, cities, counties have a lot of control over who can open a business. And you have to do these host community agreements, which are really important. Nobody wants to open a dispensary in a community that doesn't want them. But some of these become such massive investments or require significant amounts of capital in order to seem competitive and attractive to a community. And that creates yet another barrier to entry.
It certainly does.
And things like that. So I think Massachusetts, they just had, just this week, their first social equity applicant dispensary open in Boston.
I saw that.
Yeah, lines, good for them. And I'm so happy
really
for
happy,
them.
But it just took so long.
It took so long. And I think that's where they're really key. And I think we'll keep seeing core tenets, right? I know we're both on the Cannabis Task Force.
Yes.
Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. Cannabis Trade Federation.
Cannabis Trade Federation.
Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Task Force.
Yes.
And I look forward to the work we'll do there in terms of talking about what are some of the best practices. Like in Illinois, and I know New York has been looking at this, making sure that you don't have a real estate requirement for applications. Critical for reducing the capital requirements and barriers to entry, right? Having reasonable fees and access to low-interest loans. Really important for entrepreneurs who are trying to get into the space because it gives them more options. And having those different ownership requirements and things like that. I know I've talked about this, but I would love to see, as we have more and more social equity programs rolling out, things like a social equity applicant bill of rights, right? Something that helps people who are thinking about engaging in a partnership with another established cannabis company, right, that might have a minority stake in their joint venture.
Yes.
But giving them a bill of rights so they can recognize if they're being exploited, so they can understand what are reasonable things that I should be asking for, right? These are complicated business deals. And, it's one thing to have a multi-state operator with many lawyers on one side, and then a single entrepreneur with one lawyer on the other side, and making sure that we're leveling the access to information so everybody can come to the negotiating table fully equipped, I think is going to be really important.
I totally agree with you, and that's your experiences and your knowledge is just so beneficial, and I hope that you will offer us some of that in DC as we try to, try to move towards, recreational. At some point, I mean, I'm just, a little frustrated, but
yeah, I mean,
just frustrated with Congress and how they treat us anyway.
Look, as a former DC resident, part of why I enjoy living in Virginia is it is nice to have someone, to have a few more folks in Congress to be able to call. Love our DC representative, Eleanor Holmes Norton, obviously, but
she fights hard for us.
She
fights so hard for us, but. As long as we are not a state, we're going to have to go through this. So that's why we're really pushing for statehood.
Yep.
So, I want to, in honor of Women's History Month, since today is the first my first taping of Women's History Month.
Yes.
And all month I'm going to be doing women of color in cannabis. And I'm just so excited with some of the guests I have lined up, starting with you, ABC, Abebe. I wanted to ask you, what are the challenges you have faced being a woman in the industry with one of the major companies in the country, one of the largest companies in the country? It's amazing how much they have grown so quickly.
We're in two more states just in the last 6 months since I joined. I think especially coming from Democratic politics in Virginia, it's definitely a different style of team. And this is my first time in the private sector too, right? I've spent a lot of time in public sector and then as an entrepreneur and in politics, but very different from being in a corporate world. So I think there's just that general mindset shift too of just completely moving into a different part of like the American economy. And this is where I always come back to like, it's cannabis, but it's still also just like, it's just a business. But I think it's really important to find your people. Like, it's been wonderful I feel very lucky that we got to meet.
Yes, I'm truly blessed meeting you and having you in my life now.
And I think that part of like finding your allies and other women and friends is really important. Because there are times when you are the lonely only.
That's right.
And I've definitely spent more time being the only Black woman, less frequently the only person of color of any kind or the only woman, but frequently the only Black woman in a room. And I think, MJ Biz is one of those examples where unless you're at an event that says minority or women in the title, like it's overwhelmingly white guys.
When I started going there almost 6 years ago to that conference in Vegas, it was... they only had like 2,000 attendees. I think this past year we had 35 or 40,000 in that short period of time. But you can imagine there were no women and certainly no one of color. I think Shonda Macias, Wanda James, and I, those are the three, Shanita Penny, those are the ones that I remember seeing. And it was small enough that we would, women of color, and then maybe another 7 or 8 white women. I mean, we were just not there. So everybody wanted to know, who are these women and why are they here? And consequently, that's when our, relationships started developing with these now MSOs.
Now
they're all MSOs. It's amazing. Multi-state operators.
Right. We call it jargon giraffe in some of the trainings I do. I can't imagine the growth that you've seen over the course of your career and time in this industry.
I never even dreamed of being in this industry. Just like you, I think it's just like anyone, or like all of us. We never thought about this.
Yeah. And I'm glad that I'm here, and I'm very passionate. I mean, I think one of the things that's been nice about being here is I've always been really passionate about healthcare and healthcare access. And in fact, one of my first jobs out of college was on a research study on the impact of Medicare Part D on elderly prescription costs.
I tell you all, this girl is heavy. She's heavy. I love
You're
it.
Really nice.
I can talk to the guests all the time, nonstop.
But
it's encyclopedia of information here.
But on the medical front, I think we all know the cost of this product because we're not covered by insurance.
Right.
Is untenable for a lot of patients who really need this.
That's right.
The fact that we have to compete with opioids, and opioids are covered by insurance and are much more affordable, but patients would prefer to be taking our products in many instances, is really, I think.
And another thing is, think about there's no tax on opioids. In D.C., I don't know about other states, but for medical cannabis, we have to pay tax on our medicine.
Yeah.
So it's like, come on.
I know.
So you're a big science fiction fan.
Yes.
And so is my daughter, Tamia, who helps me with my program and my
we
producing.
Definitely need to talk.
And ever since she was a little girl, so she wanted me to ask you about your thoughts about N.K. Jemisin.
Oh my gosh, I was hoping
you were watching Star Trek Discovery.
That was very loud. I don't know how that's going to come through.
No, this is fantastic. He got it. So we have just a couple of minutes left, but go on. I mean, because she would kill me if I didn't ask you that.
Okay, well, I definitely want to meet your daughter.
Trekkie, so whatever.
Oh my gosh. So
whatever
obviously live long and prosper. I grew up on Star Trek. Like my family discovered America's Next Top Model because it was on after Star Trek. And then when they moved Star Trek to Friday nights, we kept watching America's Next Top Model. But I am behind on the most recent one. But I've watched everything else. Captain Sisko and Deep Space Nine is my favorite series. On N.K. Jemisin, I
have no idea.
Okay, N.K. Jemisin is basically the Beyonce of science fiction.
Okay, all right. I just learned that.
Yep, she's like literally amazing. You should tell your daughter I get to see N.K. Jemisin live on April 3rd. She's in San Diego.
Oh my gosh,
and I'm going with my mom to go to a book signing, and I'm like losing my mind. I'm so excited because she's just like especially if you're a little girl and you grew up reading science fiction and fantasy, there was not a lot of black women voices in that space.
Yep.
And N.K. Jemisin, when I first discovered her books, it was like just all like 30-year-old niggas, 13-year-old niggas, like all of me was just like felt complete. And her books explore like power and identity and trauma in just the most beautiful ways. And I could clearly, we could do a whole other podcast on N.K. Jemisin.
Oh, well, we'll do that because my daughter just started a podcast called Sci-Fi Sisters.
Oh my gosh.
Sci-Fi Sisters, S-I-S-T-A-S.
Okay, well,
don't ask me how to find out where it is, anything, because we haven't gotten that far. Yeah, I mean, she's doing it. I don't know how to do it.
Yes.
But I really want to thank you, and I really like to have you back because we have a lot more to talk about.
Yeah.
We have a lot of things to do to level the playing field in cannabis in many, many ways.
Yeah, and we've got a lot of exciting policy coming up.
Thank you so much for being here.
Linda.
And I want to thank my wonderful staff at Anacostia Organics and my producer, Tamia Harper. In this new decade, let's strive for greatness with gratitude and grace. And please visit me at Anacostia Organics, 2022 Martin Luther King Jr. Avenue Southeast. How do people get in touch with you?
With me, I'm on Twitter at Ngiste, Ngiste. And Columbia Care is off of U Street in the historic U Street district. Capital City Care is off of
Capital City Care. Yeah. And U Street.
Mm-hmm.
And Capital City Care and Anacostia Organics and all the legal marijuana dispensaries in D.C. accept medical marijuana cards from any state in the United States and Puerto Rico now.
Yes.
And Anacostia Organics is open 7 days a week. Follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. And from deep within my heart, I thank you for being here, Ngiste, and I thank you for listening today. Bye-bye.
In DC, for DC, DC Radio, 96.3 HD4, and DCRadio.gov.